I want to address something very important in the aftermath of the horrific Vegas massacre. Nancy's been talking to me today. She's been glued to the television screen, watching the accounts, watching the stories, the horror of it, the broken families, the broken lives, just beyond comprehension, and the senselessness of all of it. The pain is palpable, and the nation is rocked and reeled, and we should be rocked and reeled for some time to come. We don't just get over this quickly and go on with normal life. We have a tragedy and an atrocity on this level. Unfortunately, a lot of people are politicizing this, and they're weighing in with their own agenda. I'm not even talking about gun control issues, and whatever gun control discussion needs to be had, let it be had. Whatever is best for them, for America, whatever is best for our country, that's what I want. And I think that's what we agree on. But here's what concerns me. And I wrote an article to address it. My article is about a divided America. A divided America cannot stand. And in this article, I quote from Abraham Lincoln. I quote from a famous speech he gave as a senatorial candidate, where he explains, using the words of Jesus from Matthew 12 and Luke 11, that a house divided itself against itself cannot stand. And in America, half slave, half free cannot stand. Martin Luther King used similar imagery almost 100 years later when he said darkness cannot drive out darkness, hatred cannot drive out hatred. Only light can drive out darkness. Only love can drive out hatred. So I make that appeal in my article that a divided America cannot stand. And I say in the article, look, we have our differences. They're hills I'm willing to die on in terms of convictions. But let us listen to each other. Let us not just politicize what is happening around us. Let us constructively have discussions without demonizing each other in the process. All right, so Shaun King, who is an activist, and you might call him a social justice warrior, Shaun King wrote an article on The Intercept. This was the day after the Vegas shooting, and it's entitled "The White Privilege of the Lone Wolf Shooter." The white privilege of the lone wolf shooter. And his point was that had the shooter been an immigrant, had the shooter been a Muslim, then the massacre would have quickly been dubbed an act of terror. But because this was a white killer, he's just called a lone wolf, and it's not branded terrorism. King said this: Stephen Paddock, the shooter, like the majority of mass shooters in this country, was a white American. And that simple fact changes absolutely everything about the way this horrible moment gets discussed in the media and the national discourse. Whiteness somehow protects men from being labeled terrorists. Now, I'm not reading this and quoting this to bash this position and politicize it. I'm reading it to explain what we shouldn't be saying and why comments like this are both inaccurate and unhelpful. Then a Muslim writer, Naz Modan, this is just today, October 4th, Naz Modan, she posted an article on CNN with this title: "How America Has Silently Accepted the Rage of White Men." Do you get that? How America has silently accepted the rage of white men. And she claimed that, quote, "Mass shootings are a violent epidemic that have been met with fatal passivity for far too long. If mass shootings were perpetrated mostly by brown bodies, this would quickly be reframed and reformed as an immigration issue. If thousands died at the hands of black men, it would be used to excuse police brutality, minimize the Black Lives Matter movement, and exacerbate the raging black man stereotype. If mass shooters identified as Muslim, it would quickly become terrorism and catalyze defense and security expenditures. But this is a white man's problem, and therefore doesn't get categorized, and white people don't get demonized, and it's not considered terror." Again, these comments are as inaccurate as they are unhelpful. So I want to appeal to Shaun King, I want to appeal to Naz Modan to reconsider your words and reconsider your approach. And let me lay out a few things that really set the record straight. Number one, Americans are in pain like they were in pain after 9/11. 9/11 even more shocking in a certain way, and of course many, many more casualties. But we were in pain then because lives were lost. Nancy lost her brother, Douglas, in the Twin Towers 9/11. And for days after that, she sat glued to the TV screen, glued, watching the stories of families. In fact, one night she said, you have to just sit down with me and watch. And you just sit there, you're in agony, watching the stories, the lives torn apart, the mother that never came home, the father that never came home, the kids without parents, and on and on. She's doing the same thing now. She's in front of the TV now. Before I left to do radio today, we sat down and she was just telling me with tears in her eyes about what's happening and the lives torn apart. It doesn't matter who did it. We're in pain right now. That transcends race and ethnicity and sex. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is that there were people helping people. They weren't saying, did you vote for Trump? Did you vote for Hillary? Are you Republican? Do you carry a gun? What do you think about immigration? No, people helping people, strangers helping strangers. This is a time to come together, not to divide and not to push a political agenda. Second thing, the reason that Stephen Paddock has not been identified as a terrorist is because we have no idea what his motive is. Here's a dictionary definition of terrorism. The unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. If, in fact, we find out that Paddock had been radicalized by Muslims, if we find out, say, that he was a neo-Nazi, if he left some note behind with an ideological intent and this is why he did what he did, then it would be branded an act of terror. Okay? Let's be realistic here. There are all kinds of crimes taking place all the time and all kinds of murders taking place all the time that statistically dwarf what happened here, although the shock and the ugliness of this is beyond description. But we don't brand those other acts terrorism because they're not terrorist acts. If this had been a black man without any ideological or religious connection and some psychopath that snapped, it wouldn't be branded a terrorist act either. So let's understand this. And then thirdly, the claim that the majority of mass shootings are by whites, that's misleading. Let me explain. Newsweek said statistics show that since 1992, the majority of mass shootings, 54%, were committed by white men. According to data from Mother Jones, black people were the second largest perpetrators of mass shootings based on ethnic background, but only accounted for roughly 16% of the total incidents during the same period. Well, if you realize that whites are about 72% of the population and blacks are about 13% of the population, then it would mean more mass shootings per blacks than per whites. But either way, this is not a matter of terrorism. In point of fact, there are far more blacks killing whites than whites killing blacks, and there are far more blacks killing blacks than any other single statistic, but we don't brand the people terrorists, and we don't make generalizations based on these facts because this is gang-related or drug-related or relation or money-related, whatever, but it's not terrorism. Now, if they had said, if Sean King and Naz Modan had said, look, had the shooter been black or had the shooter been a Muslim, many Americans would have been quick to generalize. But they're not doing that because the shooter's white. Maybe there would have been a point. And maybe we could then come together on that point because we're a majority white country, so it's natural that you're going to stigmatize minorities and different ones more, just like a white person living in a majority black country or a non-Muslim living in a primarily Muslim country. This just happens normally. It doesn't justify it at all. But had that been their point, then I would stand with them and say, let's work together for justice for all. Let's work together for freedom, for liberty, for equal rights for all. Let's do that. Yes, in a heartbeat. But to write things like this, especially while the blood is still on the ground and while we're still sorting out who's going to live and who's dying and families trying to put just one little piece of their lives back together to make it through the next day. This is not the time to be making racially divisive statements and religiously divisive statements. So my purpose in responding is not to be divisive. My purpose in responding is to call for greater responsibility. My purpose in responding is to say, please watch the rhetoric and please be sensitive to the timing of all of this. And let's ask the question, do our words hurt in a negative, destructive way, or do they heal? I'm all for speaking the truth when it's unpopular. I'm all for hurting in order to heal. But other things can be reckless and destructive. I'm appealing to all sides to step higher. Let us come together and do what we can to help rather than add to the problem, and especially throw fuel on fires that aren't even there.